Warning, this is your wake-up call.
The year is 2021. It is no longer safe to transmit information. Phones, computers, and satellites are all vulnerable. But there is a solution.
Your storage capacity? I can carry nearly 80 gigs of data in my head.
Input the data into the brain of a human courier, like Johnny Mnemonic.
Hit me.
This episode, I am joined by filmmaker, reviewer, interviewer, Carl Diamond. We are talking about Johnny Mnemonic, directed by Robert Longo. This movie was released in April of 1995. Carl, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jared. I'm glad to be here. This will be fun.
So I was lucky to see this movie in theaters at a young enough age. This movie has a lot of fascinating context behind how it came to be. It's worth touching on this briefly. It's written by William Gibson, right?
Yes, it's also based on a short story that William Gibson wrote.
From my understanding, Robert Longo, the director, initially conceived of this movie as an art film, somewhere around 1.5 million. He wanted to make this black and white, and his influence was a Jean-Luc Godard film from the 60s called Alphaville, which I have not seen, but I watched the trailer for it, and it seems pretty artistically weird and trippy. You could look at that movie and probably see what he was going for, what he had in mind.
This is one of those movies where it's like, you can see the cracks in it, for me, but there's so much good. And it's such a rarity of a film, like an old artifact of something. It's the only one of its kind. So whatever cracks or whatever blemishes on it are forgivable because there's nothing else like it. As far as like what it specifically is. It's a William Gibson cyberpunk movie, and we don't have many of those.
They were shopping this around for Robert Longo's ideal vision, but when studios came on board, they were willing to let Robert Longo direct it. It had to be of that spectacle nature, and they suggested Keanu Reeves, who had just had a major hit with Speed. And that's probably why I actually saw this movie in theaters as a kid. I had been a fan of Keanu Reeves since Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, since I saw that on VHS. But the fact that this was his first starring vehicle after Speed was 100% why this movie was on my radar. I love this movie really because it's a hybrid of so many genres other than cyberpunk. It makes me think of The Fugitive, a Man on the Run type of film noir, neo-noir, sci-fi, some anime influence.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's even anime in it.
Yes, and when a movie like this gives you so much to chew on, for better or for worse, it leaves its mark.
Johnny's a smuggler, basically. He's like a mule, except rather than smuggling cocaine, he smuggles hot information. He smuggles it on a chip in his head that he has no conscious access to. And he's a little bit overconfident, the deal goes wrong, and cut to the chase.
If you boil cyberpunk down to its core, what it is high-tech, low-life. High technology in the hands of low-life individuals, criminals, people down on their luck, people living in the streets, living in coffin hotels. They got no money, but they got tech. So yeah, it's just crime stuff with technology. And a lot of the themes that are in that, you have body horror, you have man versus machine, you have post-humanism, you have transhumanism, singularity, body modification, whether from tattoos to cutting off your arm and replacing it with a gun or a robotic arm. Consumerism and capitalism are another big thing. It's all about worshiping corporations. Corporations are the governments. In a lot of cyberpunk stories, you can buy a new arm, buy a new leg, buy a better heart, buy better eyes. Just related to Johnny Mnemonic, he bought a device to up his hard drive. He wasn't born with that hard drive. In order to work, he had to buy that. And it cost him his childhood. It's like really over-the-top cyberpunk. That's not sleek like The Matrix, but it's not goofy like Lawnmower Man or Tron. It's purely the way one author saw cyberpunk.
For 13 years, I've gone on and on describing environments like this. These are, for some reason, whatever this is, it's very, very central to my art.
There's a classical focus style to this movie that is very locked down and actually, I would say, pretty confident and meticulous in terms of how it's all crafted. It's funny because I'm paraphrasing, but Robert Longo has a quote that is something to the effect of, "It was my first movie. I had too much money. Where the fuck do I put the cameras?" So he was kind of in over his head on this, but it feels very much put together more than competently.
While certain scenes feel like standard 90s sci-fi action, the majority of it is super stylized. You wouldn't think this was the guy's first rodeo.
To your point, you have all the stylistic tropes that really brings you into the world. There's such a craft going on in terms of angles, and there's a lot of Dutch angles. You could tell there's really a sincere effort to create atmosphere in terms of shadows, and everybody is always kind of walking through steam and smoke. It's stuff like that that I find really brings you into the world of this movie.
The restrictions of film and the beauty of film really help this film stand out.
Yeah, there's just this beautiful grain to this movie. Johnny, or Keanu, talks about the garbage blowing back and forth in his classic monologue, and this movie almost feels like beautiful garbage in a way.
The veil of fantasy is there. Film allows this movie to be beautiful today. If it was shot on a DSLR, it was like an indie film shot on a DSLR, it might not survive. But since, of course, it's a big budget Hollywood movie, it was shot on 35mm.
There's just such an eclectic side cast to this movie. Udo Kier as Johnny's agent.
Yeah, the fixer.
He dies in a very graphic horror movie kind of way.
Gross way,
Just gets split in half by the Yakuza henchman. His thumb laser, or his finger laser.
His laser wire, in the Cyberpunk universe, it's called monowire. Laser wire is more like it.
That effect scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, because I wasn't even into horror movies then, and it's pretty graphic.
Comes out of nowhere, too. You don't expect it.
Yeah, like his body just slides apart. It's great because it tells you how dangerous this weapon is. Although I think we had seen somebody's hand get sliced off before that.
Yeah, that's somebody's hand. It's like, oh, like you see that in Star Wars.
Yeah, this is somebody's entire body and head.
Yeah.
You could have fucking killed me! Run away!
Password enter.
When a lot of people who know this movie think of it, they think of the special effects. Certainly at the time, it was a big deal. The special effects work. Like, I can still buy into it because it's not depicting reality. It's just this completely simulated world. They seem very of the 90s. They still seem fleshed out and polished enough that as a special effect, it works.
It's not trying to be anything real. It's like a painting, This is what the artist thinks it is. Okay, cool. That holds up throughout time. I don't think any of the CG is ever juxtaposed with real footage of
Right,
people.
and that's a big...
And I think that helps.
100%. You're either looking at a live action scene or cut to everything done in the computer.
Yeah, you're in a different world, so that's what the world looks like. And then anything that isn't real is a puppet in the real world, like the dolphin.
Jones is magical. It's a great practical effect that is 100% believable. One of my favorite scenes in this movie, and this is just a scene I'll YouTube so often, is the, I would say, classic Keanu Reeves monologue. How he's fed up with his situation. He just wants to get back to his hotel where he can get his suits laundered, spend some time with some hookers, and all he wants is room service. It's a good performance by Keanu Reeves. He's been pretty stoic and regimented this entire movie, and then he finally just snaps and lets it all out. To me, it's one of the classic scenes that this movie has to offer. It's just Johnny Mnemonic freaking out, fed up with his situation.
You listen to me. You see that city over there? That's where I'm supposed to be. Not down here with the dogs and the garbage and the fucking last month's newspapers blowing back and forth. I've had it with them. I've had it with you. I've had it with all this. I want room service! I want the club sandwich. I want the cold Mexican beer. I want a $10,000 a night hooker! I want my shirts laundered. Like they do at the Imperial Hotel.
People either love that dialogue, love that monologue, or that's the point of the movie where they say this movie is awful, but it's wonderful awful. I think that's unfair. That scene really saves the movie in a lot of ways. It's a change. He's completely changed from that point on.
These are elements to the movie that skeptics or haters of this movie would probably be like, well, they're not fleshed out enough. They're just like these little unexplored, non-completed scenes.
A lot of the times in these pulp stories, that's all you get.
Right.
All you get is a flicker of a character. It's not underwritten, it's just pulpy.
Yeah. It's just well-made pulp genre.
Usually things have to be over-explained to death in Hollywood films.
I really do love the tech disease layer to this movie. Like you said, some very interesting stakes. If you're going along for the ride, then this is some extra substance.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great scene with Henry Rollins' character, this hacker doctor guy, Spider. And he's got this great semi-monologue about how everything is fucking these people up, all this technology, everything around them, all the augmentation.
The world causes it. This causes it. This causes it. This causes it. Information overload. All the electronics around you poisoning the airwaves. Technological fucking civilization. But we still have all this shit because we can't live without it.
When you read prose, the stakes don't have to be so high. But when you make a movie, the stakes have to be very high, especially a big Hollywood movie. Stakes have to be super high because everyone has to be able to relate with it. Turning it from this guy's gonna get killed by a ninja because he has secret Yakuza documents to, hey, this guy is being hunted down because he has the cure to this pandemic level disease. He's gonna save the world as far as the common man goes. That change, while not accurate to the short story, was necessary. If you don't know anything about Cyberpunk, this is a great movie to start with because it is a film by the godfathers of Cyberpunk, if not the godfather of Cyberpunk, William Gibson, who did coin the term cyberspace. Without William Gibson, we wouldn't have any of the genre we have today. And if you love Cyberpunk but haven't seen this film, check it out too. It's required viewing for you.
This movie is responsible for a lot of movies that have come out in more recent years that have a more prestigious, let's say, reputation.
I loved the new Dune, but a lot of people came out and said Dune was too dour and too gray and boring, and that Dune needed to be more colorful. That is this movie. It's sci-fi, but it's super colorful. This movie isn't dour.
Someone can say we're in our own bubble in terms of us being very favorable to this movie, but given all the hate for this film, I think this movie needs two people in the bubble of positivity.
It's called classic Cyberpunk, man, and what more could you want? Come in, there's plenty of room to love this movie.
And that is...
Johnny Mnemonic.
If you saw Speed and you weren't into sci-fi, and you were like, I just love Speed because, oh, fast bus, and Keanu Reeves, and sexy babe, Sandra Bullock, oh yeah, this movie's so fucking great. And then you see Johnny Mnemonic, and you're like, what the fuck is this shit? I don't understand any of it.
There's the scene where Johnny, Jane, and Spider leave Spider's shop, and they get into his truck, which kind of is big enough that it almost looks like a bus. And then the street preacher, Dolph Lundgren, shows up in front of them, and they try to run him over. The studio mandated that scene because Keanu Reeves had just done Speed. So they figured a shot of him right up front riding this big truck that looks like a bus in the trailer would exploit the popularity of him having just done Speed.
Oh, I like that scene. But hearing that, that's really gross. Cinematically gross, you know? That's like when you have a scene in a movie where a character's saying like no, and like they zoom into his face as he's doing that, and it's like, you know, they shot that just for the trailer.